Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our 2023 Holiday Winemaker Roundtable. My name is Mark Vernon. I'm the president and CEO of Ridge Vineyards. I'm going to be your host here today. We want to encourage everyone to participate in this event. So we encourage you to do two things. One is ask questions. And if you do have questions for us, the way to do that is to use the Q&A function here in Zoom. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon that's labeled Q&A. And if you click on that, you can open up a window. And in that window, you'll have an opportunity to type in any questions that you have for us. In addition, you can use the chat function to simply say hello, maybe tell us what wine you're tasting, share greetings to your friends. But like I said, if you have a specific question that you'd like us to answer, it's really helpful if you can put that in on Q&A, because it helps keep it separate from this flow of information going on in the chat right now. So I'm glad to see we got a number of people here who've tuned in, and I think we're going to go ahead and start with our program now. The one other thing I've been asked to tell you is if you care to do so, please tag us on your social media with @Ridge Vineyards. We appreciate that. Any comments you might have to make, we'd like to see that as well. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists that we have here today. So first, I'd like to introduce Shauna Rosenblum. Shauna is our winemaker at the Lytton Springs Winery. And Shauna has just completed her second harvest here with Ridge, and what a harvest it was. Next, I'd like to introduce Trester Goetting, who's our winemaker at the Monte Bello Winery. And I think this is Tress's third vintage, so welcome, Tress. And then our head winemaker, John Olney, who now bounces back and forth between both of the wineries. And John, how many harvests is this for you now?
Wow, that's a good question. If I did the math, well, it's a little over 25. So
perfect. Yeah, so that's a lot of harvests. And actually, it's my 25th year at Ridge. So I joined just before the harvest in 1998. So I think between the two of us, we've seen a lot of grapes come here through both of these two wineries. So I want to thank the panelists for joining us. And maybe to kick this off, I'd like to talk a little bit about our process that we go through every year. And it's always a fun exercise to look back in our library and choose some nice wines that we think people would enjoy during the holidays, either as maybe giving as a gift or just purchasing to have with friends and some wonderful food. And because Ridge wines are really created not just to drink by themselves, but for us, having a wine that works well at a meal with good food is important. And so as a result, we like to think about when we're selecting these library wines, we think about the kind of food people like to have during the holidays and what's going to work well, what's going to pair well with those dishes. And each year we offer actually some recipes of some of our favorite dishes, the ones that we think really go well with our wines. And this year we decided to ask all of our employees to submit one of their favorite dishes for consideration in our holiday food and wine pairings. And I think that we're going to just hear a little bit about those right now. We'll start with you, Shauna. You had one of your recipes selected, so tell us about that.
I did. You folks may have seen the picture of those delicious looking Brussels sprouts. That was my recipe. And it's very simple. It's bacon, Brussels sprouts, saute the bacon, and then put the Brussels sprouts in the bacon fat, cook them like that. And it's delicious. And it pairs with both white wine and red wine. The fat content really needs a little bit of wine. So it's a great side dish for Thanksgiving, and something that my sister and I always love to make.
Excellent. Thank you. And Tress, I think you also had a submission that was selected for this year's holiday feast.
Yeah, I did. I chose to go with a herb crusted rack of lamb. I love lamb during the holidays, and this recipe in particular is fun. Well, for a few reasons. The ingredients are really great. I mean, anytime you can use panko breadcrumbs, nice olive oil, garlic, and you got to have fresh mint in there. I've never been a mint jelly guy for a rack of lamb, but I love fresh chopped mint in the mix. Rosemary, lemon zest, and then the Dijon mustard, and you get all of these things kind of mixed as a dip or a roll, and then you pan sear in a cast iron skillet, and that just gets the house smelling so good. And really, that's what kind of motivates you to open that bottle of wine and drink as you go. I personally chose the Lytton Springs to pair with this delicious meal, and Shauna will talk about that, and maybe as we taste it, we'll see why. But the other reasons I love this is that it's fairly easy, and I love things that are easy and quick during the holidays. It really only takes about 20 minutes in the oven. Of course, that's not counting the prep, especially nor the cleanup, but it's a fairly easy recipe. It's delicious, and it goes really well with Zinfandel.
Super. Oh, I'm getting hungry already. So that sounds wonderful. These and other recipes that are part of our holiday feast, we make available to you through the website, and also actually one of the things that we offer is the holiday feast pack, which comes with all the recipes and all the recommended wines for pairing. So if you're intrigued by what you've heard here in terms of these two recipes, I urge you to take a look at that entire holiday feast pack. So with that, I think we'll jump into the specific wines that we had selected for the roundtable today, and let the team here talk a little bit about each one of them. I think the first wine that we're going to take a look at is our 2022 Grenache Blanc from Paso Robles, and I think we're going to maybe let Trester tell us a little bit more about this wine.
Yeah, I love that we're looking at this today. It's such a fun wine. It goes with a lot of fairs, cheeses, charcuterie boards, shellfish, any kind of seafood. But the biggest thing that I wanted to kind of point out is the varietal breakdown. It's 86% Grenache Blanc with 14% Picpoul, and then also with that, the AVA, the growing area of Paso Robles. So this is actually a blend of 3 different vineyards, all located within different areas of Paso Robles, which is a pretty big appellation, as you can see there. It spans, from right along the coastline all the way into about 14 miles east. And the 3 vineyards that we use to create this wine are kind of scattered from west to east. So we have one close to the coast, one right in the middle, and one on the east side. So these 3 vineyards are the Halter Ranch, the Adelaida Ranch, and Fossil Creek. So we had been, most of you know, but we had been bottling the Halter Ranch and the Adelaida vineyards as their own wines, as their own bottlings. And in 2022, we acquired a new vineyard called Fossil Creek, which is on the western edge of the appellation. And like always, we ferment them, we pick them and ferment them separately, and we see what we have. And we're tasting these, and we're thinking about the 3 Grenache Blanc offerings. And we started playing around, and we said, what if we put these all together? What would we have? And we did just that, and we tasted the components and the final blend blind with the panel of us, all of us winemakers, and we found that the blend of all three was a superior wine. So it was kind of a no-brainer. And what those three vineyards offer is a really great look at the AVA itself. You've got everything from rich and ripe, kind of tropical fruits coming from Halter Ranch. You've got Adelaida, which lends kind of a balanced mouthfeel and a freshness. And then you've got the Fossil Creek, which to me, I think really gives this wine its fresh pop of acidity. And of course, that's where a lot of the pick pool comes from, which is a big contributor to that acid. But at any rate, it's they work very well together, and this is what you get. It's got, you know, peach, melon, white flower. It's just a beautiful aromatic wine. It's friendly on the palate with acid. It's got mouthfeel coming from the different vessels that we ferment in, everything from concrete amphora to stainless steel to American oak. So it really is, it's more of a complex wine than one would think for something that's a Grenache Blanc from Paso Robles. It's a very layered and complex, and it's a beautiful, fun wine. So I'm hoping you guys enjoy it tonight.
Tress, this has a really great like ginger note right now that's kind of accenting all of those aromatics that you just pointed out. I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, that's kind of new. I get that as well. And there's this like little bit of like a lemon zest with that, or an orange zest maybe. But I'm picking up on that too, and I think that's kind of coming out as the wine evolves in the bottle now. It's still pretty young.
Yeah, I love this wine.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I do too. And John, I think it was that kind of magical moment when you guys decided to just try what would happen when you put those three different vineyards all together, right? It was like something happened, and it was clear that result was just really the superior wine, right?
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I mean, it's pretty exciting too for us, you know, at Ridge. I mean, we've made a white wine, or Chardonnay from Monte Bello, ever since the beginning of Ridge. But we've always sort of limited white wine just to that, where we felt Chardonnay is just ideal. The conditions are ideal for growing Chardonnay. You know, we're always open to new varieties and new areas, but nothing really stuck out as special in that kind of unique match of site, variety, soil, and microclimate. But we really think we've got it here with the Grenache Blanc down in Paso.
Yeah, no, I agree, and especially the Adelaida vineyard. When you're driving up there, it's interesting because you have this a little bit of feeling like maybe you're driving up to Monte Bello, because you're going up this windy road, and there's actually a little bit of limestone around in that area too, which again, we've talked about how rare limestone is in growing areas in California, and yet there it is, a little bit of it present there in the Adelaida portion.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, the soils are just like, you know, looks like a moonscape. I mean, it really is. They really are special.
Super. Okay. Well, I think that's a good start with the Grenache Blanc. Maybe we can move on next to one of our library selections, and that's going to be the 2015 Geyserville. And it's always fun to see how Geyserville can evolve with a little bit of age. And it's also fun because this was our 50th anniversary bottling of Geyserville, which goes all the way back to the 1960s, when the founding partners of Ridge first started buying fruit from the Trenadu family and making this beautiful wine. So maybe you can go ahead and maybe we'll start, Tress, if you can tell us a little bit about sort of what makes Geyserville unique and special.
Yeah, love to. So, well, first of all, speaking of unique and special, this label we cannot overlook. It's very rare that Ridge ever has a special or different label. So this is really a big homage to the anniversary, and it looks very cool. It stands out, and it really represents, I mean, consecutive vintages since 1966. So I just love the way this label looks. It jumps out at you. But as far as the wine itself, I mean, I think the unique thing about Geyserville um, the thing that gives it consistency is the vineyard blocks themselves. So you see there on the map, we're located in the Alexander Valley, Sonoma County. And this is a very unique spot for the vineyard blocks that go into this wine. It's actually a series of vineyard blocks that are all very unique. So we have everything from pure young vine, 100% Zinfandel. We have mixed blocks. We have mixed blacks and old patch that's over 135 years. We have Petite Syrah. We have all of these different clones and different types of vines in these blocks. And it's kind of like I look at it almost like a quilt work or a pattern of individual blocks that we pick separately, ferment separately, and then it really becomes almost a winemaker's blending game, which is a little unique for the Monte Bello wines. The wines usually make themselves and they speak to the blocks, and that's the same thing here, but fermenting, you know, a couple dozen different lots individually and then creating a blend that always has this consistent style of red, fresh popping fruit. This one in particular has, the 15 has a darker stone fruit character. It's got density, it's got layers, but it still always has this nice, beautiful acidity, this vintage and every Geyserville. So that's kind of the hallmark characteristics of those blocks. And it's a really fun wine to make. John and I have been kind of assembling this over the last couple weeks in the cellar. And in fact, just yesterday, we created the core blend, and it's in tank, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's right on par for what we'd expect, which would be what this is tasting like here. So that's kind of the laydown of how we assemble this wine and how we look at it and how it comes together.
Yeah, that's no, I mean, as Trester mentioned, that's you know, we've been tasting 2023 wines for the last 2 months, so it's nice to be able to switch gears to something that's really settled in. I think one of the unique aspects also of this vineyard is, you know, Zinfandel as a grape is, you know, its calling card, so to speak, is you know, is that really sort of jammy fruit, very upfront and forward style of wines that come from that grape. And yet, when it's grown in a place like Geyserville, you know, this 2015 at 7-8 years is really just starting to open up. I mean, this is a wine that has another 10 years of cellar time ahead of it to continue to evolve. You know, and I think you know, you have the age of the vines and the mix that the varietal mix that actually goes into this is fairly, you don't see it too often, because after Zinfandel, the next largest percentage is actually Carignan, whereas typically in Zinfandel field blend vineyards, it'll be Petite Syrah, which is actually what we'll see in the Lytton Springs. So but yeah, this is you know, the wine is just it's a really beautiful example of just how complex and enjoyable Zinfandel can be when it's grown in the right places in California.
Super. Yeah, I think the complexity that we get with Geyserville and some of the unique character from that, especially that location where the vineyard it is, just really makes this wine special. And also, gives it that ability to age and evolve and change. And with Geyserville, I always enjoy seeing, what's it going to taste like now? Give it a couple more years, and how is it going to evolve? And I think it often rewards your willingness to wait a little bit and see what the wine is going to look like. So even this, 2015, I think still has plenty of life. John, what would you see the future of this wine?
Well, I mean, based on one of the nice things about making a wine from the same vineyard since 1966 is we have the opportunity to look back and for example, it's been a while, but at least a year or so ago when I had the 97, it was a beautiful wine. So I'm sure that this wine, for those with the patience, could age for another 10 years in the cellar without any issue.
Perfect. Right. That's why you always have to buy at least a case of these wines so that you can, enjoy some when they're younger, but you sort of keep waiting and pull that next bottle after another year or so, and then you can see how you can enjoy them over a nice span of time, right? If you can keep your hands off of them long enough. So yeah.
The 04 Geyserville is probably one of my faves. I love that vintage.
Yeah, actually that's one I really like too, Shauna. It's beautiful. Okay, so having heard about Geyserville, let's now switch gears and talk a little bit about Lytton Springs. And the 2017 is the Lytton that we have pulled out of the library and included in our holiday offerings. So, Shauna, maybe tell us a little bit about what makes Lytton Springs so special and your.
Sure, and I'm going to kind of piggyback on what John said earlier about in the Geyserville, we'll see after Zinfandel, we'll see Carignan as the next leading percentage. And here we have Petit Syrah. And Lytton Springs, the oldest vines are the Hills, planted in 1901. And then we have the Flats here, planted around 1910. And we do also pick each parcel individually and ferment each parcel individually. And that said, there's not a recipe for Lytton Springs. When we're making it, we're fermenting each one of these parcels and we're going through the tanks and we're tasting them and deciding this is Lytton worthy. This is an A+. This is exactly what we want. So, learning to make Lytton Springs last year, I'm asking John, I'm like, so what do we put in there? And he goes, whatever tastes the best. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's an amazing vineyard to work with, and it is, Zinfandel in a field blend, and we have the entire vineyard mapped. I don't know if we have a picture of that, but it's a super, super cool picture. It identifies every single vine in the field blend, and there's Zinfandel, Carignan, Mataro, Petit Syrah, Alicante Bouschet in almost every block. And then we have some younger blocks that have been replanted just to Zinfandel or just to Petit Syrah. It's a phenomenal vineyard to work with, and it's I was a Ridge Club member before I became the winemaker here, and Lytton Springs has always been one of my very favorite wines. And the 17 is gorgeous. 17, much like this year, we received lots of rain. So there was rain, there was a cool spring, but then it got hot, which makes it the difference from this year. And so it looks like we got all the grapes off before the heat wave came in 2017. And so I think, as far as ageability, I think we're in a really sweet spot for this. And I think this could probably go another 15 plus years. It's like gorgeous, gorgeous. John, do you have any memories of the 17 vintage with this?
Yeah, well, no, I likewise, I remember the similarity of, having a lot of rain, the vines were healthy, there were a lot of grapes on the vines. I think what's really special about having these two wines right side by side is you get to see that difference. The Lytton Springs and the Geyserville vineyards are really are not that far apart, just a few miles apart, but At Lytton Springs, again, you have more Petite Syrah there. There's a lot more clay in the soil, so the wine tends to be a little darker, a little more broad shoulder, a little more tannin to it. You know, it really is just coming into its own right now. So it's
beautiful. Well, and Tress, I've heard you talk about, you know, the soil over at Geyserville before as being, you know, formerly like Russian River, right? Like that's what the vines are growing in.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially ancient riverbed.
Right.
As the river receded, you're growing these grapes on soils that were underwater from the Russian River. So that creates this really beautiful gravelly, loam, rich soil,
Right.
and you really taste that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it really is fascinating if you come to visit us at Lytton Springs. I mean, the vineyards are so close as the crow flies, but the wines are so different and they have their own personalities, their own expressions. I'm really happy to be sitting here drinking this with you guys right now.
Yeah, that's something we usually do every year is we'll you know, as a group we just sit down and we'll taste an older Lytton Springs and Geyserville blind next to each other. And I think you can always see that difference. You know, I confess that I haven't always gotten it right, but you know, there's definitely it's neat to just see that sort of thread of similarity through the vineyard.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So Shauna, this particular harvest, how many separate parcels are you harvesting and fermenting from the Lytton Springs for, you know, that potentially could make up Lytton Springs? Quite a few, right?
Yeah, it's too bad I have the background because I would turn my camera and show you my boards. There were, you know, 50 to 60 parcels between Lytton East and Lytton West that were fermented separately. And it was a phenomenal vintage this year. I mean, it made us wait. It said, you're gonna wait. And we said, okay, fine. And we picked each one individually and the quality has been so high. There have been very few blocks omitted. So that's really good news.
So it looks like we've got a pretty healthy Lytton Springs in store for this vintage then, right?
Yeah, and you know, the quality is just, it's so exciting. You know, when leading into this vintage, we kept trying to compare it to, oh, it's like 2011. Oh, it's like 2019. Oh, it's like 1999. And I think the concentration in the wine that we're seeing, you know, kind of reminds me of that 1999 that we tried, you know, in Tahoe. That was just, I mean, it knocked everyone's socks off. And I think it's so deeply flavorful and concentrated, but there's present acidity. The pHs are nice and low. It's a very ageable vintage.
Yeah, that's super. And I think for this current this similar, same things kind of go for the Geyserville vineyard as well. Trester, I think you've been pretty happy with the results there too, right?
Yeah, very, very happy. John has yet to taste the blend. He was at Lytton yesterday when we put it together, and I almost didn't want to tell him because I wanted to see the look on his face because it's really good. I'm very proud. I'm very happy. I think we're gonna be in store for a great wine.
Yeah, no, we've had a few questions pop up about this year's harvest and all the rain that we had, and which was really great because the vineyards, you know, needed that rain after, you know, multiple drought years. But the challenge was it didn't stop raining until late in the spring. And so the vines didn't really wake up. It was cool and rainy for a long time. So the vines didn't really wake up and start growing until much later than they had the past few years. And then we had a relatively mild summertime. So the growing season, it was actually rather ideal. But because we started late and we never really had any big high heat, it meant that the grapes were just taking their sweet time.
They're semi-sweet
to get ripe, right? So it was a lot of waiting before it was time to start picking. and that got everyone a little bit nervous because you literally can run out of time and find yourself in a situation where the grapes can never, you just don't have enough daylight or warmth to get the grapes fully ripe. But fortunately, we managed to avoid that, and for the most part, get everything to a good level of ripeness. And I think as Trester and John and Shauna have explained, we're feeling pretty good about this year's vintage. But let's keep going. Yeah, good. But let's keep going with some of these library wines. And so we're going to move on from the Zinfandels, and now let's take a look at the Cabernet based wines, and maybe we'll start with Tress on the 17 Ridge Estate Cabernet, and tell us what you're tasting in this glass. What do you think about this wine?
Man, it's so I opened my bottle about 2 hours ago, and I wish I would have opened it 4 hours ago, but it's a wine that deserves a decanting, and same with the Monte Bello when we get to that. I mean, these are considered young wines, and you'll taste that. But at the same time, to me, when I put my nose in the glass, there's this deep, dark, just popping from the glass blackberry, cassis, deep, rich aromas. So that's always a good sign. But the thing that I love about the Estate Cab, the 17 here, is that fine grain tannin profile. It just coats your whole mouth. The tannins are not angular. They're very rounded. And that's a great sign for long ageability. And it also, the style of this particular vintage, it's more of an elegant style, and it's got these layers, so it's complex, but it has, just like its brother, the Monte Bello, it does have this minerality component to it, and we could go on and on about that and why, and we probably will when we get to the Monte Bello. But to me, I mean, that summarizes the characters, and then you end that with a very long finish. It's got a long way to go. It's just a baby, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, no, I totally get that too when I'm tasting this wine. I've noticed that I want to thank Owen Bargreen. He's joined our seminar here, and he's also has a really nice blog on wine, and has written a lot about Ridge and our wines, and we really appreciate that, and we appreciate your participation today. And of course, Owen was smart. He says he opened his 5 hours ago, so he's probably really enjoying that glass. But John, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the selection process and how we go about looking at putting together the Estate Cabernet versus putting together the Monte Bello. I think that's a question a lot of people like to understand better.
Yeah, and we kind of touched upon it a little bit when we were talking about the Lytton Springs and the Geyserville and all the different parcels and how we ferment them separately. And the whole selection process is something that I really think when I joined Ridge, it was one of the first things that I noticed, and it was something that I think that one of the many things that I think Paul Draper really brought to Ridge. And it would be easy to just sort of harvest the vineyard, all at once and throw everything sort of into the same vat. But it takes a lot more time and a lot more attention. But by harvesting each parcel, as it gets to ideal ripeness, and then fermenting those separate, keeping them separate, letting those go through malolactic, and then lining them up and tasting them blind to really look at them as objectively as possible and select the ones that we really think are the most intense and represent the vineyard in any given year, is one of the, I think, key ways that we're able to maintain consistency through the vineyards, through the vintages, and that high quality. And that's especially true with Monte Bello, because at Monte Bello, unlike with our in Sonoma with our Zinfandel vineyards, you have just these parcels that it's very balkanized, and you have these parcels that are dotted all over the ridge line, going from 1,200 feet all the way up to 2,600 feet. So in any vintage, we typically will have 55, maybe even 60 or more separate fermentations to then assess after harvest. And what we've found over the years is that certain parcels usually are a little more approachable, and evolve maybe a bit more on a quicker schedule than some of the other parcels, which tend to be more compact, more intense, a little more tannin and structure, and the most ageable. So those latter ones go into the Monte Bello, and we take the other lots and we make the estate Cabernet out of those. I think when we say that the estate is a little more approachable, I think we have to take that with a grain of salt, because within the context of Monte Bello, and Monte Bello really is one of the great ageable wines of the world, I think it's fair to say. We've many of the wines, if you're fortunate to taste any of the Monte Bellos from the early 70s to this day, are not only perfectly intact, but they're just beautiful expressions of the vineyard. So we're talking about a wine that can age in any vintage for easily for 30 years, up to 40 or more years. So the estate, when we say it's a little more approachable, we're still talking about a wine that matures over a 20-year period. So it's certainly not a wine to be overlooked.
Well, this one I think is showing what a high quality wine it is, and yet it's also a wine that will clearly benefit from some additional aging time, right? So has really some really great complexity. And I think you made the point, John, and I'll emphasize the fact that the Monte Bello vineyards are mountain vineyards, and they're at different elevations. They also have different exposures. They also have because of the topology, the way that the air comes in off the ocean, it can be different. We have this inversion effect a lot of times. It can be fog in the valley or sunshine up high, or it can be cold winds up high and warmer, climes below. So there's incredible diversity of climate, soil, exposure, and I think it makes it challenging. It can be a real challenging place to grow grapes, but the reward is that you can get this incredible complexity that you're not going to find when you have a single flat uniform vineyard with everything kind of very similar. It's a lot easier to farm those vineyards, and you can make some really good wine from them, no question. But to get that ultimate level of complexity, I think it's just one of the things that makes the Monte Bello vineyard such a special and unique place to make these kind of wines. So I think we'll go ahead and take that next step and move on from the estate and take a look at this 17 Monte Bello. So it's kind of fun because here we have the same vintage. Now we actually opened a Magnum here because we are selling Magnums of 2017 Monte Bello. So when you bring wine out of a Magnum, it's probably not going to have evolved quite as fast as a 750, but I still think it'll be interesting here to compare the Monte Bello and the estate in terms of how similar are these wines and how different are they, and what are those similarities and what are the differences. So maybe Tress, you want to start that discussion and tell us about this Monte Bello.
Yeah, I think the similarities are, it is interesting as I taste them. But if you look at the varietal breakdown on the two wines, they're very, very similar. About the same percentage of cab, 21% Merlot in the estate with only 15 Merlot in the Monte Bello. The Monte Bello, though, has an 8% Petit Verdot. The estate has 3% Franc and the Monte Bello has 4% Franc. So that's pretty close. But I love Cabernet Franc in both of these blends. And to me, even though it's only 3 and 4%, I think that really fills out the mid palate. I love the high, anytime we see 3 to 5 to 6+% of Franc in these blends, I tend to really like them. And then of course the Petit Verdot and the Monte Bello is going to give you the muscle to put you that extra decade, or I'd say, of ageability. But it's not just the varietals. It's like what John was talking about. It's the selection. You know, these when we taste these and put the assemblage together, it's all blind. So the vineyard blocks will tell you what goes into the Monte Bello. It's purposeful blending. We're trying to achieve two different things, but the wines tell you. But I always find it interesting to look at the varietal percentages when you have the same vintage of the two different wines, and to see that they're so pretty similar, but yet in the mouth and in the palate, the longevity of the Monte Bello is far superior.
It's richer. It smells richer. It tastes richer.
Yeah, yeah, dense. That's exactly what John and I have been looking for in the 2023s. Is there's this thing that happens with the density of the wine, and how if that is there, it can handle the tannin. Don't be scared. It's yeah, we can do it. But if it's not, if the density is not there, maybe it's not the Monte Bello. So
right.
Yeah. Would you
Well,
agree?
I think it's also a fascinating process, because the fact that we make, Geyserville, Lytton Springs, Monte Bello, all with that same kind of, we're going to allow the best fruit to guide our decisions and the best blocks to guide our decisions. Most wineries don't do that. I think that's, fair to note.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, just taking 17 Monte Bello as an example, I can't, I would have to go back and look at notes to get the exact number, but I think that there were upwards of 60 different fermentations. And, this wine in the end, we only selected about just a little over 20, I think 23 parcels to make the wine. So it's a pretty rigorous selection process. And, I think it really shows in the final wine.
Agreed.
Absolutely. In fact, why don't we talk a little bit more about that selection and then the assemblage process that we go through when we're looking at these different parcels and how we make that determination. John, tell us a little bit more about that assemblage process.
Sure. So, in the new year after harvest, usually by late January, the wines have settled down. Most of them have gone through malolactic fermentation, and and they're ready to be assessed. And we line them up. We gather as a group, the entire production group, with the vineyard team in the room together. And we'll go through them usually in flights of 5 or 6. So it starts in the morning, and we just taste them all blind, and we just everyone gives them, basically chooses, if we have 6 wines, everyone chooses what they feel are the 3 best in that given flight. And then we look for, we see where's the consensus, and we kind of build the wine around that. We just start, if everyone likes this block and that one, then we put that together, and now we sort of have a new, what we call, base blend. And then we go on to the next flight, and maybe the first and the fourth wine in that flight, there's a preference. So we try those two in the base blend, we taste that, we see if we're happy with that, and then we just keep moving on in step by step. And it's usually a 2-day process, and that's what we call the first assemblage, so that's usually early February. And then there's always going to be some lots where we're not quite sure, is this estate, is this Monte Bello? So we'll hold those out, and then we come back usually in May, and we do a second assemblage to see if those should or should not be included in the Monte Bello.
Right, and it's always interesting when you have that base control, and then you're tasting. Do you like it better with an addition made to it, or do we still like the base control by itself? And we do this all blind. Of course, you can't have, there's always some speculation at the table. Oh, this must be the base. Oh, this must be the control. And of course, we've tasted the control just probably 10 minutes earlier, and yet it's not always completely apparent. And sometimes you'll think this is the wine that I've made the addition to, and it turns out, no, that's actually the control. And actually, I still like the control better. So we'll take that other wine and set it aside. And interestingly enough, sometimes you set it aside and you might come back to it again later in that same assemblage tasting. And then it might actually fit better later once more components have started to come together. Or maybe it doesn't, and maybe it has to, be set aside, and maybe you'll come back to it in that second assemblage tasting later and see how it's evolved and so forth. So it's really a fascinating process. It's time consuming. Your mouth is pretty destroyed after a day of that activity, right? So, but I think it really is. It's all about how you put the best wine together that you possibly can, and it really comes down to just careful tasting and making those decisions, right? So it's fantastic. So one of the people a question has just been asked about how, what are we looking for when we make an addition? What is it that we're trying to have happen when we put that addition in to decide that that's going to be a superior lot? So Tress, maybe give us your thoughts, and John, Shauna, you've all the beauty of the Monte Bello assemblage is that even though we have, primary, in this case now, Trester is the primary winemaker, John's also helping, but we bring everyone together because the Monte Bello assemblage is such an important activity that we really want to get everybody involved in that. And I think this is something that goes back to Paul Draper and really his genius of in the case of wine, a lot of wineries have one person, the winemaker, and they're making all the decisions themselves. Once in a while, there might be an owner peering over their shoulder, but in so many cases, it's only a single person. And Paul was, always willing to bring in the team and have them participate. And the beauty of that is not only do they get to participate, but they're learning, and you're training, and people are gaining the experience. And so you can have this group of people who've done this for many years together and really start to understand this process and what makes this wine so special. So Tress, you when you joined Ridge, you sat in that first assemblage tasting. What did you think about that?
Yeah, and that was about 2 weeks after I'd been hired, so it was a little it was pretty intense. And I had never been in something like that, and it's very unique, and I really love it for many reasons. I mean, it's a democratic process, and I've always been a belief that the more palates on a wine, the better. Yes, sure, some wineries that I've worked at have been solamente, it's just the winemaker and maybe the owner, maybe the assistant winemaker, which there's pros and cons to, but I think having more palates is a good idea. It can be humbling, but I think for the big picture end goal result, it is the best way to go. Yeah, so that's kind of my take on that. I think, and then to answer the original question, of what are we looking for when there's something with these in and outs, the ones that we're not sure about, that we compare to the core blend. It's, for me, what I've found is that it tends to be like a, we've got the fruit, we typically have the tannin and the length. We have different components that are making this up. There's something missing, and it usually tends to be the mid palate. There's something there's a hole there, is the way I look at it. And certain lots have this tannin profile that will just complete the wine. It's hard to describe. Shauna's probably pretty good at describing this, but you know what I mean, Shauna? It's like, it's like something that, and when it hits it, you know it.
Yeah, no, I do. And yeah, last year was my first assemblage tasting, and kind of, I wasn't given a rubric for like, this is what we're looking for. You go in and you're kind of like looking for the wine that is the most Monte Bello, and you just kind of have to like know it and feel it. And I think something that I heard come up over and over again was, wow, this has really incredible mountain character. And so there's, when we're looking for what the Ridge Monte Bello is, there's just, it's kind of its own vibe, and it's got mountain character. We keep talking about structure in the assemblage. We're really looking for wines that are going to help build a very intense, ageable structure. I know there was a wine in the assemblage that I was absolutely certain was Petit Verdot. I was like, oh, this is a killer Petit Verdot. It's so intense. It's so structured. And then it turned out it was Merlot. And that kind of speaks to the intensity on the mountain, regardless of variety. There is an intensity to anything that's grown there. And it's an incredible process. And like Trust said, quite democratic, quite humbling, and super educational. I mean, it's one of the coolest things I've ever experienced as a winemaker.
So we had a question, and the answer is yes. Paul, even though Paul Draper is retired, he really he's not involved in the day-to-day activities in the winery so much anymore. But the one thing he always does is come and sit in on the Monte Bello assemblage tasting. So having somebody there who's been a part of that wine making that wine since 1969, it's just incredible. I mean, to have that institutional knowledge in terms of the history of the wine and parcels and specific lots, especially some of the older ones that have been around that whole time, to understand that. So we all continue to benefit from Paul's wisdom and guidance at that table, but he certainly wants to hear from, and actually we all, everyone participates in the discussions. The other thing was, there again, part of that, what are we looking for? So we're looking for intensity, we're looking for ageability, we're looking for complexity, but we're also looking for balance. And I think that balance word, we're looking for good mouthfeel, but we're also looking for balance where all the components are working together in harmony to give you a great end result. And so that nothing is sticking out, there's too much, the tannin is getting in the way of my enjoyment, or the acid is too prevalent, or maybe there's some other note here that's maybe a little discordant. There's too much of a particular type of fruit or something else that I'm not as happy with. So I think the questions there have been a lot of questions about, well, what are you looking for? How do you know this should go in? And are you running analysis? Are you doing testing or labs? And the answer is yes, we do a lot of that. But that is only sort of secondary. It helps inform us. John, you can talk a little bit more about that. Some of those things are useful, they're helpful, they help guide you, but that's not what you're making the decisions on, right?
Sure. I mean, we take full advantage of having an on-site laboratory to see what's going on in the wine. But in terms of putting the wine together, it really is based on taste, and I think also on taste that's informed by having worked with this vineyard for decades. I think that's you know, I sort of recognize that as one of the advantages that Ridge has, you know, to be able to, you know, have that sort of background when you're approaching tasting something, knowing, you know, what it typically tastes like over the years. So, you know, I think a lot of times the tests we run are I think more sort of for confirmation rather than to decide, you know, do we want to include this or not.
Oh, and I have something to add to that. So at the end of the assemblage, everything is blind, and then we open up 5 vintages of Monte Bello, like basically the current one, and then the last 4, all are blind, and we see if we can tell the difference, which I think is just such a cool exercise at the end of that. And it seems like a slam dunk that you would say, oh yeah, this is obviously the brand new wine. Not always.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it really it's kind of the final vote in a way, because you know, if it stands out as just being very different from all the others, and then we know we you know we need to revisit you know what's causing that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think we're reaching towards the end of our time together here. So I want to thank the panelists for joining today and sharing all their thoughts about the wines. I would like to encourage you to take full advantage of the opportunity to purchase these lovely library selections. It's one thing to let everybody know is that we only really make these kind of library selections available for everybody to purchase at the holiday period. Now, if you happen to belong to one of our wine clubs, then wine club members actually have access to buying some library wines throughout the year. So if you enjoy these wines that have some age, and you'd like to be able to purchase them throughout the year, I would strongly encourage you to consider joining one of our clubs, because then you would have access to them throughout the year. I think it's been fun watching the chat. We've had a lot of discussion about which was the favorite wine of the night, and I think we've got a number of votes for several of the wines. So I'm glad to see that, because it looks like people are enjoying a number of the wines that we had here to share with you this evening. I think with that, we will encourage you to check out the holiday offerings. You know, don't forget the holiday feast pack with those incredible recipes that everybody submitted. And I want to wish you all a very happy and safe holiday season, and hope to see you around the winery sometime soon. So thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.